Okay, have a great day, everyone. Welcome now to Bioethics Handouts number 2. Of course, this online lecture was made because we cannot do actual face-to-face handout lecture due to some events that happen in CPAC. Once again, this is Mentor Noy or Sir Noy Gonzaga, and this is Bioethics Handouts number 2. To start with, let us have our words of wisdom. So our words of wisdom comes from Nelson Mandela, and he said, an educated, enlightened, informed population is one of the surest way of promoting health of a democracy. Wow, very nice quotation. Of course, Nelson Mandela is always connoted with democracy. So, ethically speaking, if we want to be a part of a very, very good population, it's always nice to be ethically founded people. Then our biblical text is found in Philippians 4 verse 9, and it says, those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and God of the peace shall be with you always. Very nice. It is very unethical for us not to use the things that God has given to us. Oftentimes, this is considered as selfishness. So ethically, we are bound to use all the things that that we have learned to others, to our friends, so that we will also become channels of blessing for these people. So, what are the ethical qualities of a health educator or future nurse educators like you? Number one, first, let me have a gentle reminder. As a nurse, you're educated with things that you will also relate to your target population. Assuming that your target population is, what do you call this? Assuming that your target population would know the health principles is in itself ethically wrong, meaning you should not assume whatever it is that your students or your learners know. Meaning, assume that they do not know anything so that you can teach them and you can do everything in your powers to educate them. Nurses should always be primary educators, and by doing so, we should not choose whom to educate, how to educate, but we should educate in general. So, the goal of health education is always to establish rapport. As what I have said earlier, this is one of the first things that you do when you are having your duty in the hospital. If you establish rapport with the patient or with the student, majority of the work is already done. However, even how good you are as a nurse, if you can establish rapport, you will always just have lower than 50% success rate in your performance as a nurse educator. Another goal is self-control under work stress. Always remember, an health educator will impart these values to the patients, students. Well, someday when they become teachers, they will not be as strict and monstrous. You know what? Sometimes when we are educated by very, very strict and always angry teachers, well, someday when we already become educators ourselves, we also tend to be strict and always angry, even not in the play, even not needed already. Just because we see this from them, we thought it is already right. That's why as a nurse educator, you should know how to teach correctly. And teaching correctly does not mean becoming a monster in front of your patient or your student. Rather, be a friend to them. Be a comfortable teaching partner to them. Next, health education should be emphatic in familial caring ways. Well, an educator should be full of compassion. When there is compassion in health education, there is less stress and pressure. That means it is an ideal environment. But I really believe in this because when I have students in the OR before, as I heard from them, they're always very erratic. They always commit errors. They are always stressful with other clinical instructors because they tend to always think that they're wrong because of the strictness implemented. So on my part, I do it another way around. I try to teach without forcing or being strict. I teach in a way that there should be a loving environment. Of course, a loving environment that caters to the needs of the patient and the students. In this way, when there is love in the teaching profession, in the educational profession, there is always continuity of learning because there is no fear. Fear is always the greatest reason why nurse educators or students who wanted to become nurse educators in the future actually become monsters in themselves because they do not see the real idea that education should always be a happy atmosphere. Now, another goal of health education is realistic human attitude. An educator should become understanding if he or she experiences what the patient experienced, which means let us always remember that the person we are caring are sick. If we want to know how to deal with the sick, let us remember the time when we are also sick. What kind of feeling do we have when we are sick? What is our aura then when we are sick? It's only then that you will understand that it's not very easy to listen to a nurse, to listen to a health educator when you're not actually feeling well. It takes a lot of connection. It takes a lot of talent. It takes a lot of comfort in order for the nurse to connect with a patient. So always remember, okay, the persons you are caring with, the persons you are dealing with are actually persons who are not in good physical condition. If we are referring to students, let us also remember that students are not yet professional nurses. Let us treat them as if they hunger for learning. Let us not treat them as if they're already professionals and we expect that they know everything and we get angry when they do not know what we want them to know. Well, do not forget, you professional nurses were also students before, and most of them are not as brilliant as what they are trying to project. So when you become professional someday, don't ever forget that students are just going towards that direction and they are not yet there. Okay, another thing I want to remind with this is stay away from the fallacy of which you always mention, like, I know what you're feeling, mom. Example, you're facing a cancer patient and you say, I know how hard it is for you, mom, because I know your situation. Actually, that is a lie because you do not have cancer. So saying that to the patient is actually creating this lie, and the patient knew that you're not a very good um, an honest nurse because in the first place you have not had cancer. So stop using the approach which says, um, I know what you are feeling if you really don't have the experience that that patient has experienced. Now, another goal of health education is duty above personal gain. Let us always remember, time may sometimes be sacrificed because of our work. A good educator or health educator should do your best in achieving the primary goal of health education, which is holistic excellence. The problem is if education is one-sided at all times. Always remember, it's not only the students learning from the teacher also learns from the students. And when this kind of environment happens, there is always a symbiotic success between the teacher and the student. So always remember, it's not about the time. It's about what we have done with the time. Because if our goal is to help the students, is to help the patients, time will just be another element towards that success. Now, another goal is welcome always new idea. Remember, there are no perfect people in this world. Okay? An educator should have a mind that is open. so that she or he can always explore all possibilities and look at all the angles of life, making it versatile and fathomable of the in one's self. What we're trying to say is, if you open your mind to new ideas, you will be learning from the mistakes that happen. You will be learning from the hardships in the situation. If you will not open your mind, you will always frown and say, it's just a bad luck for the day, and you do not accept mistakes, and learning is not possible. So welcome always new ideas. Another goal of health education is prioritize the welfare of the clients. Always remember, you are the well person here, the clients are the sick person here. So prioritizing your own needs or your own wants is really unethical, because the weaker persona in this system are the patients or the students. Remember, health educator can be called immutable if he or she fights for the welfare of the patients and the students, and not on the benefits of the co-professionals who can defend themselves. That is why it's so sad to say that sometimes some workers in the system are very close to each other, very close to the administrators, and they sacrifice the students. Some teachers, that is including me, will always fight for the welfare of the students, even if it means becoming very, very distant to my co-teachers and even to the leaders, of which students are always the primary factor why we are here. Without the students, there will be no school. Another goal of health education is maturity in the field of practice. A health educator should know what he or she is doing if they support patients and students and not compete with them or race with them. This is what happens in immaturity. You know what? Sometimes some teachers are competing with their students. Some nurses are competing with their patients. Let us not forget that we are already at the professional level caring for people who are not as well as us. Now, being patient with them, being open-minded with them, being more understanding with them is the greatest maturity you can have in the workplace. Never compete with your patient or never race with them, because that is a sign that you are not yet a self-actualized nurse. Another goal of health education is love for job makes it light to bear. Well, if you are only forced to take up nursing, this is the problem, because you are only here for the aim of going abroad or earning a lot of money. The love of job is not within the tenets of earning. It's always when your heart is happy in doing the work. That is why a good health educator starts by loving the job. If you cannot love your job, you cannot project, or you cannot lie, or you cannot have facades, or you cannot hide from people that you are disgusted with your job, because even though how much you will do that, there are always times that you will be caught unaware showing your real emotion for this profession that we are taking. Another goal of health education, know who to give credit to. Remember always, credit is good. But if you claim credit which is not yours, that is still dishonesty. So give credit to whom credit is due. A nurse educator should not only be ready to scold the students always, but they should as well equally be ready to appreciate and give citation to people who deserve it. This is the problem sometimes with our school, with our teachers. We are very fast in scolding, in getting angry, in reprimanding. But when students do something good, we cannot even appreciate, because we think it is lowering our standards when students are getting within our level. That is wrong. When students are good, doing good, and becoming higher in level, that is a success because of the help of the clinical instructor, because of the help of the health educator. So there is nothing to fear that the students will become better than the teacher. This is a very immature way to see things through. So, as a nurse educator, give credit to whom credit is due. Basically, that is a first-line honesty that can be seen by everyone. And if you have that, people in the workplace, people in the profession will respect you. Now, let us go now to the ethical duties of a nurse in health education. What are these? First, the nurse has a duty of rights orientation. Always remember, the patient needs to know what he can do, what he cannot do, what he is allowed to do, what he is not allowed to do. Now, if the student or the client does not know this and they create an error, it will always bounce back to the competence of the nurse or the nurse educator who have educated these students or patients their rights. So always remember, it is very important to educate our students or educate our patient their rights. Second, we have the duty to get informed consent. Remember, everything in our profession that is subject to invasive procedure. When say invasive, something of which you inserted or you punctured. Again, you inserted or you break the skin integrity. That is what we call as invasive procedure. So when there is an invasive procedure, it is always a primary rule for you to get informed consent. Not during, not after, because that will be unethical already. Because if something happens, well, you will be the one responsible for that because the person whom you have invaded, whom you have performed invasive procedure, have notified through written signature. Remember always, you cannot bank through vocal or oral words of this patient. It's not acceptable in court. Okay? So you have to have a signed document called informed consent. Next, you should know the client's competence. How do you know the client's competence? Well, you should know if the client is oriented to time, to date, and situation, if the client is coherent, conversant, okay? If the client can supply data or details that you're trying to ask them accurately, and it is not actually wrong or it is not wandering, then the client is actually competent to make the decision. Always remember, you should not come up always with the option of paternalism if patient's autonomy is still available. Remember that always. So determine your client's competence. How do you view an incompetent client? Well, we discussed this last meeting. An incompetent client or an incompetent patient is someone who is not coherent, who is not conversant, who does not know the time and the date, who is under medicine that has side effect of dizziness and headache, okay? Person who are under anesthesia, and other things that will disrupt the mental status of an individual. Well, drugs is already one of them. Now, as nurse educators, we have the duty to explain what is paternalism. We will explain to them that the doctors can always suggest, but it is still their will or their decision that will be followed. They have the right for an explanation, but their autonomy will always be respected because that is the highest form of right a patient can have in a certain medical condition. Now, what are the 12 rights of a patient? Okay, the patient has, I'm experiencing some problems here. Okay.